Mornings in the Wrangell St. Elias Mountains were always the same, still and biting cold. James, a seasoned conservationist, walked slowly beneath the snow-laden pine branches. His boots sank into thin layers of ice. His breath rose in clouds of vapor with every step. Then, suddenly, a trail of blood. Fresh, bright red, still dripping. James froze. His heart pounded. This wasn't normal. Years of experience told him only large animals leave marks like this. He knelt down, touched the blood. Still warm, without a word, he followed it. The trail pulled James deeper into the woods. Dawn's light pierced through the trees like icy arrows, casting long, flickering shadows across his face. Every step cracked frozen branches, soaked leaves. Tension kept building. Then, a smell, sharp, metallic, blood, and fear. James held his breath. His fingers brushed the knife on his belt. His eyes scanned the trees, every movement deliberate. And then, he saw it. A massive brown bear, collapsed in a shallow basin near a frozen stream. Its fur was soaked with blood. A razor-sharp steel wire was wrapped tightly around its front leg. So deep, the flesh was completely buried. Only a dark, bruised dent and thick, pulsing blood. James stood paralyzed. The sight was heartbreaking and terrifying. A full-grown bear in pain was a ticking bomb. One wrong move, he'd be dead in seconds. Then, the bear opened its eyes. Not with rage, but panic. It was cornered, wounded, desperate. James's fists clenched. His chest heaved. Forward or back. This was it. Life or death. If he walked away, the bear would die from blood loss or predators. But if he made one mistake, he'd be next. And then their eyes met. And in that moment, James saw it. Not a threat, but a plea. A silent cry for help. No more hesitation. James dropped his backpack, crouched low, inched closer. Each step thundered in his chest like a war drum. Snowflakes blew sideways in the wind as if the mountain itself was warning him, turn back. But James didn't stop, because somehow he knew this moment would change everything. Just a few steps away now, James reached into his bag, pulled out a pair of wire cutters and an old, battered first aid kit. His hands were trembling, not from cold, but from the weight of what he was about to do. He looked at the bear. She was still breathing, heavy, strained. Eyes full of pain, despair, and something else. Acceptance. Like she knew, if this man didn't help, she was going to die. James whispered, voice calm but shaky. Easy. I'm here to help you. The words weren't really for her. They were for himself, to keep his hands steady, his fear in check. He moved forward, like walking a tightrope. Eyes locked on the bear's face. She flinched, but didn't growl. That was his chance. He examined the wire. It had sliced down to muscle. The blood was thick, black red. He could even see bone. Snip. The first cut echoed like a gunshot in the frozen woods. The bear tensed. A soft growl rumbled from her throat. It was instinct, fighting against the fragile trust they had. James froze. Despite the 10-degree air, sweat rolled down his back. He didn't move, didn't blink. He waited. And then, the bear breathed. Slow, steady, eyes closing in pain, but not rage. Cut by cut, James worked. Each snip shattered the silence of the forest. Each one pounded in his chest like a war drum. Minutes passed. 20. Agonizing. Minutes. Steel. Blood. Fear. And then, finally, the last piece of wire dropped into the snow. James let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He nearly collapsed. But the job wasn't done. He cleaned the wound as best he could, dusted on powdered herbs from crushed bark, wrapped it in makeshift gauze. It wasn't perfect, but maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. Before standing, James looked at her again. Her eyes were heavy, nearly shut. He reached out, gently touched her forehead. A moment of connection. Man and beast. No fear, no sound. Just trust. Then he whispered, "You're a warrior. From now on, your name is Hana." It wasn't random. He remembered the meaning from an old friend's language. Hana meant blossom, a sign of new life. And James, he wanted this bear to bloom again, even in a world of ice. 2 weeks had passed. Since that day in the snow, James was back to his daily routine, checking camera traps, logging animal movements, removing snares left behind by poachers. But in his mind, she never left. Hana. Each night, when the wind howled outside his cabin, he'd see her again, lying in the snow, bleeding, whimpering. Her eyes, red, glassy from pain and cold. "Hana, are you still out there?" He went back, again and again, to the same place. The basin, the frozen stream. But there was nothing. No paw prints, no blood, no broken branches. Just forest. Endless, vast, silent. Too big to know who lived and who didn't. It was a foggy morning. James was walking the eastern woods, the area where he'd installed a motion sensor camera. His body moved on autopilot, but his mind, it was lost, wandering in questions and silence. Then, a sound, soft, subtle, not leaves, not small animals, something else. He stopped. That familiar feeling, it crept in like mist. He was being watched, not threatened, not hunted, just watched. James turned around, and there, through the thin mist, a large shadow stood between the snow-covered pines. Hana. She didn't move, didn't growl, didn't walk away. She just stared, and he stared back. No one spoke. No one needed to. She nodded. Or maybe she didn't. But James felt the message. I'm alive. I remember. From that day on, she came back. Every day. Never too close, never too far. always within reach, but never crossing the line. James called it the silent presence. A quiet shadow, watching, waiting. When James paused to rest, Hana paused too. When he drank from the stream, she sat nearby. She never turned her back, never took her eyes off him. No one taught her to do that. No one told him to trust her. But between them, something sacred had formed. No longer just man and beast. They were survivors of the same trial, bound by silence and watching over each other. Nights in Wrangell St. Elias weren't like anywhere else on earth. Colder, darker, and above all, silent, to the point of dread. Not peaceful silence, the kind that presses down, the kind that makes you feel like the forest itself is holding its breath. That night, the wind changed. James was journaling inside the ranger station when the motion sensor flashed red. Movement. Northern cliffs. An area almost no one ever entered. He didn't hesitate. Boots, headlamp, hunting knife, radio, go. But something felt off. Hana wasn't there. Usually whenever James went out at night, she'd appear, quiet as snow, watching from behind. But tonight, no breath, no shadow, no sound. James felt it. Unease. Instinct. Something was wrong. He pressed on. His flashlight carved narrow beams through the snow. Trees whispered in the wind. He reached the cliff's edge, where the sensor was placed, bent down to check it. And then, a shiver. Down his spine. Not from the cold, from instinct. James straightened slowly, turned around. Amber eyes, then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 glowing eyes, watching, waiting. A pack of wild wolves. They moved in formation, silent, precise, deadly. Predators who had done this 100 times. James stepped back, toward the cliff wall, knife in hand. But he knew, 6 wolves, 1 man. No chance. He avoided eye contact. But he couldn't look away completely. One blink could be the end. The wind howled. Snow whispered through the trees. Moonlight broke the clouds and glinted off their fangs. He held his breath. No rescue, no backup, no Hana. The alpha crouched low, growled. The signal. They began to move. One from the left, another near his leg. Closer. Closer. James braced himself. And then, from the darkness, a roar. Primal, thunderous, ancient. Hana. She burst from the ravine, a mountain of muscle and fury. The forest shook. The wolves froze, eyes wide, ears back. One lunged, too late. Hana rose on her hind legs, towering, fangs bared. She slammed down like thunder. Boom! The first wolf flew backward, crashed against the cliff wall, unconscious, instantly. But the others, they didn't run. They circled, fanned out, strategic, ruthless. From the left, from behind, from below, they attacked. One sank its teeth into her hind leg. Another dove for her throat. Hana roared, spun, lifted them both, threw them like rag dolls. But now, blood trickled from her shoulder, dripped onto the snow. James couldn't take it anymore. He shouted, "Hana, fall back! That's enough!" But she didn't stop. She wouldn't. Then, the alpha wolf charged, the biggest, the fastest, the most dangerous. It leapt, fangs flashing, and sank its teeth into her neck. Blood sprayed, a savage arc, red on white. Hana stumbled, but didn't fall. Instead, she turned, bit down, hard, straight into the alpha's throat, slammed it down, crushed it under her full weight. 300 kilos of wild fury and righteous power. The pack hesitated. Her eyes burned. She was no prey. She was a warrior. The alpha lay broken, whimpering, then dragged itself into the shadows. The rest, they ran, vanished, leaving behind blood, fur, and fear. James rushed to her side. Hana was down, gasping. Blood ran down her chest, neck, and hind legs. But her eyes, still open, still locked on his. James dropped to his knees, pressed his hand to her soaked fur. "Why? Why did you save me?" His voice cracked. "You could have run. You could have lived free." Hana didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. Calm, heavy, sorrowful. She understood the cost. The price of a friendship that defied nature itself. James tore a strip from his coat, pressed it to her wound, hands shaking. He didn't know if she'd survive, but he swore, if there was even a sliver of hope, she would not die alone. Not. The wind howled through the ravine, still thick with the scent of blood. James pressed his ear to Hana's chest. He stopped breathing, listening, praying, and then a heartbeat, faint, fragile. But there. "You're alive, Hana! You're alive!" He sprang into action, ropes, a wooden plank, all his strength. He dragged her through the snow, inch by inch, falling, stumbling, hands soaked in blood. 3 hours later, they reached the ranger station, the only light in the wild dark. James lit the fire, wrapped her in blankets, became a healer, whether he wanted to or not. He boiled water, cleaned her wounds, crushed spruce resin, white angelica root, a remedy an Inupiaq elder once taught him. He threaded a needle, stitched her open flesh, thick thread, trembling hands, tears falling, knowing it hurt her. But there was no other way. And Hana, she never resisted. Not once. She just endured. In silence. Sometimes she gave a low grunt. Not pain, not anger. Just something like, "I trust you, James." 11 days passed. Then, one morning, she lifted her head, then stood, then limped to the porch, where sunlight kissed the snow like scattered salt. James sat beside her, every day. He didn't say much. Sometimes played the harmonica. Sometimes told stories about his mother, his lonely childhood, and why he chose this life. Because animals never betray. One afternoon, he paused mid-note, eyes wide. Hana gently nudged a bowl of water toward him with her nose, as if to say, "Drink, I owe you my life." A month passed. Hana's wounds had healed, about 80%. And then, one morning, She was gone. Back to the forest. Back to the wild. Back to where she belonged. But James knew. She never truly left. Then, something unexpected. A research team from the University of Alaska arrived. They came to collect data on rare wildlife. One of them, while reviewing trail camera footage, stumbled upon something strange. A man, walking through the woods, followed by a giant brown bear. Not attacking, not fleeing, just walking. Together. The footage spread like wildfire. Scientific forums, news sites, documentaries. Some called it a hoax. Some said it was fake. But others came to the forest to see for themselves. And they did. They saw her. Not up close, but always there. A shadow among the trees, a quiet presence. Since then, her name has been whispered. In conservation summits, in ecology classes, in wilderness documentaries. But no one calls her a bear. They call her a phenomenon, a symbol, a silent guardian of the green. A creature who rose above instinct and chose trust. A being who fought to protect a human. As for James, he never gave interviews, never wrote a book, never accepted the media offers. He simply kept doing what he always did, walking the forest, checking the cameras, writing his notes. And behind him, always, Hana.